far within the untamed core of the African plains, where existence and demise reside, merely a pulse away, a remarkable event occurred. A pale lion whelp arrived in a realm governed by intuition and endurance. Due to his uniqueness, he turned into an object of dread, dismissal, and peril even amongst his own troop. Yet no soul realized that this instance of sorrow would result in a meeting that altered everything and revised the destiny of both human and beast for all time. The initial glow of dawn stretched over the Serengeti North Sanctuary, like a sluggish flame gentle and amber, brushing every leaf of grass as though rousing the earth by touch. The evening had been enduring and harsh for the feline Mara. She had toiled in quietude beneath an acacia, her respiration uneven, her frame shivering from fatigue. Yet now, as the star ascended, 3 petite shapes huddled near her stomach. 3 souls she had battled with fang and nail to deliver into this reality. 2 of the offspring appeared as any veteran warden might anticipate, tiny, beige-hued, still sightless, their pelts marked with dim spots that would vanish as they matured. However, the 3rd infant Mara hesitated when she initially beheld him. His coat was startlingly light, nearly luminous in the faint shine. White, not the rich yellow of his kin. He was slighter, too delicate in a fashion that made her spirit tighten. His miniature torso trembled with every inhalation, as though living itself was a steep ascent. The breeze turned, conveying the aroma of gore from the delivery spot. It floated far across the protected zone, locating a male who had witnessed numberless sunrises, yet still honored everyone. Warden Ethan Walker, aged 42. Ethan had passed more time in attire than devoid of it. First in the armed forces, subsequently in nature defense. Both vocations molded by a feeling of obligation few folk still possessed. He strolled the morning beat with his field glasses dangling at his torso, observing indications of motion beside the stream. His profession demanded alertness, particularly recently. News of a daring scavenger pack had been arriving for weeks, and their conduct troubled him. When hunters become hopeless, strife increases not merely for beasts, but for the people residing on the border of the park. He scrawled a note within his pocket journal, a routine he enacted daily, born of custom and rigor. Hyena action growing. Watch strictly. For the majority, nature preservation seemed tranquil, nearly idealistic. Yet out here it entailed accountability, hazard control, and choices that weighed as burdensome as any assurance policy or lawful deal he once had to handle during relief missions. One incorrect judgment could expend lives, creature and person alike. He kept hiking until a dim collection of noises drifted to him on the gale. Tender, fresh, shaky, the mewing of newborn whelps. Ethan decelerated, surveying the skyline. Someplace out yonder, concealed in the long reed, a lioness had delivered. He observed the rule never disturb a laboring mother, but he took a cerebral record of the rough location. Fresh souls in the sanctuary meant fresh factors, and every factor counted, particularly at this time. Not far distant, Mara laid her skull next to her 3 young, her sinews still spasmed with remaining tension. She washed each infant softly, cleaning their coats, urging heat into their quivering frames. The 2 amber cubs wriggled and searched naturally toward her midriff, their starvation pushing them. The snowy infant trailed in the rear, doubtful, slipping over the parched turf, as though even motion charged him more than he possessed to offer. Nevertheless, Mara pushed him ahead with her snout, directing him to a spot amidst his kin. Her intuition realized he was distinct, yet her spirit understood he was hers. She coiled her form defensively regarding the trio, creating a biological barrier against the cold that still stuck to the daybreak atmosphere. A gloom drifted above, merely a scavenger bird rotating idly, yet Mara's hearing flickered. She recognized the aroma of peril better than any being living, and presently there was more than the standard menace floating from the flatlands. The terrain had grown more silent over the prior weeks. Scavengers had attempted more gambles, traveling nearer to feline domain than normal. Rivalry for food was mounting as the arid period extended, and every hunter was more ravenous, braver, more rash. As Mara rested in the herbage, she sensed the ground shake with remote strides. Not near enough to frighten her, but near enough to prompt her that the sphere outside her infants was pitiless. She buried her jaw tighter to her bosom and draped her appendage over the young, guarding them from the draft. The pale whelp Snowy, although no title had yet been uttered, raised his crown only partially. His little mouth shook as if the struggle of respiration consumed the bulk of his power. His kin twisted with increasing hunger, but Snowy merely held to being in the most silent manner, oblivious that even his hue was a hazard, a signal in a territory constructed on disguise and shades. Ethan halted on a crest, viewing the grasslands. From that viewpoint, the Serengeti opened up like a vast yellow sea. To the masses, it appeared calm, a pristine wilderness maintained by rules and statutes. To Ethan, it was a combat zone of endurance, a location where every dawn brought fresh trials. On dates like this, he could not avoid pondering the delicate stability he guarded. He had once likened it to a lone, ceaseless maintenance, ceaseless duty. Skip one installment and everything commences to collapse. He raised his optical device. Something sparkled afar, a spot of bleached luminance that did not resemble sunshine on rock. It blinked once, then vanished into the reeds. Ethan scowled, correcting the sharpness. Zero, but moving gloom. Yet something in his stomach clenched. He had studied to rely on that sensation over the decades. Beneath, Mara finally permitted herself to shut her vision. Her frame drooped with marrow-deep weariness. She had performed her role by guiding these infants into reality. What occurred subsequently, that was in the grip of the destinies she could not manage. She only wished the earth would be gentle, although she understood from history it scarcely was. And as the day star rose loftier, heating the soil, neither Mara nor Ethan possessed any notion how rapidly that delicate calm would fracture, nor how the tiniest, frailest whelp amidst them would turn into the focus of a gale that would rattle everyone, feline and mortal alike. The day star had scarcely ascended when the silence surrounding Mara's lair shattered. A row of shades traveled amidst the high reeds. Constant intent, leisurely. Ka, the pack's ruling female, guided the path with her giant shoulders carving a trail across the dawn-illuminated savanna. Trailing her were two senior females pursued by the fidgety strides of the juvenile male Jarrow, his ruff still brief, yet his mood already infamous. They were arriving to welcome the fresh offspring as felines forever did. An instance that ought to have been plain accustomed, nearly ritualistic. Mara raised her skull at their arrival, her hearing angling rearward with both dignity and anxiety, her frame coiled defensively about the three infants. The pair of amber whelps squirmed keenly, detecting motion and heat. However, the third tiny, bleached and so silent, stayed squeezed near her stomach, like a dying coal battling the gale. Ka attained the burrow primarily. She inhaled the breeze, absorbing the aroma of delivery and gore. Her vision relaxed for a second, acknowledging Mara's achievement. Yet as she bent down to examine the young, her look altered. Her stare solidified on the pale-coated baby. Zero, in her ages of guiding the troop, had readied her for such a view. She flinched minimally, a slight, but revealing adjustment in her posture. In her wake, the other females traded deep rumbles, hardly hearable yet packed with wariness. Felines relied on disguise to endure. A bleached whelp was a signal, a hazard, a fracture in the organic arrangement. It was not brutality that rendered them uncomfortable. It was intuition. Jarrow arrived finally, and unlike Ka, he did not trouble to conceal his response. He snarled beneath his respiration brief and keen a noise that caused the sod to quiver. His yellow optics tightened, focused on the little being that ventured to be distinct. In his junior rash, brain variance signified peril, and peril required activity. Mara stiffened, dipping her crown above the infant's. Her orange eyes sparked a mute caution at Jarrow, a memory that she was still a matron and would guard her kids. Yet she could not disregard the strain mounting in the ether, winding around them like fumes. She realized her station in the pecking order, and she understood the pack's laws ran deeper than any single female's spirit. Ka revolved around the lair pensively. She was elder, sagacious, molded by numberless combats and periods of adversity. When she ultimately communicated, though her terms were voiceless, conveyed through stance and deep vibrating inhalations, Mara comprehended the note. This whelp alters all things. Distantly, Ethan Walker surveyed the grasslands with a skilled vision. He possessed no notion what was transpiring betwixt the beasts. Yet even from afar, he felt a modification. The scavengers he had been trailing, guided by the unyielding Zana, had been becoming more bold. He had noted fresh marks near drinking spots and beside heavily trodden migration routes. It brought to mind situations he had witnessed in mortal crises, where stress and lack produced strife. He had once detailed it to a co-worker as nature's variant of a vehicle crash. One split-second blunder and existences are transformed forever. He halted when he noticed motion where Mara had delivered. Several feline outlines clustered together. It was not abnormal, yet something regarding the view captured his focus. He lifted his optics, yet the wavering warmth made the picture fuzz. He could distinguish figures, but not specifics. Still, he possessed a persistent sensation, one he could not quite title. Returning to the burrow, Ka poked Mara softly, attempting to sustain peace. Yet Jarrow marched nearer once again, his appendage jerking with irritation. He smelled the snowy baby, then emitted a vexed huff. To him, the baby scented frail, incorrect, defenseless, a burden that could entice hunters like the hyena tribe already skulking in the edges of their domain. Mara rumbled quietly, a matron's alert, positioning her pad over Snowy, as if screening him from criticism itself. She was spent, yet drive made her brave. The young, particularly Snowy, required heat defense duration, but the troop assessed endurance over emotion, and emotion held no slot in the computations of the wild. Ka eventually walked betwixt Mara and Jarrow, ceasing the clash, before it intensified. She did not assault him, yet the command in her bearing was clear. Even Jarrow dipped his crown slightly, although he kept on glower at the little white infant, as if it had personally insulted him. The other females started floating back toward the primary zone. Their responses had been delicate, yet the bulletin was plain enough. Snowy's existence disturbed them. The pack flourished on oneness. Anything that interrupted that oneness, be it an ill whelp, a peculiar aroma, or an odd pelt, gambled, drawing killers nearer, and killers were already observing. Mara observed them depart, her respiration shaking. She gathered Snowy even nearer, though the infant did not move. His tiny gasps came tender and faint. She nudged him, washing the summit of his bleached skull. His hide felt chilly under her liquor, excessively cold. As the final tail vanished into the skyline, the terrain grew silent again. Yet it was not a restful silence. It was the quiet of stress, of abiding, of accumulating tempest clouds just past the border of view. Mara did not know what the troop would resolve, yet she realized one matter with freezing lucidity. Snowy's existence had turned more intricate the second he came into the sphere, and elsewhere on the distant edge of the sanctuary, Zana inhaled the gale, her faculties honing at the dim odor of fresh life, soft exposed, and unlike any she had scented prior. A thing was commencing, a thing none of them could yet perceive, but all of them would shortly experience. The gloom of the Serengeti possessed a specific manner of stifling noise, of transforming the earth into a colossal and respiring obscurity. Yet even within that murkiness, certain beasts navigated with intent. Zana, the leader of an expanding hyena tribe, slunk amidst the high reeds with her hearing angled ahead and her snout quivering. She had been scouting the boundaries of feline domain for days, presently analyzing habits, hunting for frailty. And this evening, she discovered something fresh floating on the breeze, something dim, tender, and perilously tempting, the aroma of fresh infants. It was not abnormal for scavengers to observe lion troops. The equilibrium betwixt them was as ancient as the terrain itself. However, lately game had become rare. The arid period extended further, every annum, and starvation rendered even veteran hunters rash. The more Zana sought, the more she comprehended. This was no longer regarding chance. It was regarding endurance. She inhaled the atmosphere once more, grasping a second odor that perplexed her, something fainter, something that did not correspond to the standard stench of lion whelps. She cocked her skull, doubtful if her faculties misled her. But then she emitted a deep signal to her group, motioning them to pursue. Where there was fragility, there was sustenance, and her tribe required sustenance more than ever. Returning to the burrow, Mara's ears flickered at the remote, undulating cackle of a scavenger. It was slight, yet to a matron separation meant little. Dread crept along her backbone as she wound her frame tighter about her young. The amber ones cried and twisted, seeking heat. Snowy remained motionless, too exhausted to stir, his respiration soft and jagged. Mara groomed him repeatedly, attempting to heat him, comfort him, shove existence back into his miniature form. She did not slumber, not entirely. Her vision shut only in brief shaking spans, before parting again to survey the obscurity. She could feel it, that alteration in the ether that informed her something was observing, biding time floating nearer with every hour. She was not incorrect. Several leagues distant, Ethan Walker hiked the border of his beat, with his beams slicing through the moon-washed turf. He had delayed returning to the outpost, anxiety eating at him. Something in the fashion the scavengers had been traveling earlier disturbed him. They were not merely foraging, they were hunting. He halted near a bunch of stones and withdrew his pocket journal, scribbling notes the same way he had once recorded crisis actions during his army days. A portion of him always likened wildlife conduct to human hazard. How an abrupt lack or emergency could spark a chain reaction. Like an assurance demand stacking up following a tempest, one incident in the wild frequently resulted in 10 more. And presently, the hyenas felt like nature's variant of a looming catastrophe. A rustle jerked him from his musings. He spun rapidly, surveying the reeds, but whatever produced the sound had already slid into the shade. He suspended his breath, hearkening. 0. Still, the disquiet persisted, sticking to him like dampness. In the interim, Zana and her group crept nearer. Their pads pushed noiselessly into the soil, their motions synchronized through intuition and soft, nearly melodic trills. Zana stopped when she attained a crest, viewing Mara's lair. She squatted low, staring into the gloom. She could not view the infants from this span, yet the odor was undeniable, crisp, exposed, unguarded. What startled her, however, was that peculiar bleached aroma woven amidst the known. It made her more inquisitive, more keen. It suggested a frailty she did not yet comprehend, but frailty nonetheless. Mara's respiration became thin as her senses honed. She stood up silently, placing herself betwixt the young and the exposed turf. Her sinews throbbed from delivery, yet she compelled her frame into a guarding stance. She pushed her snout to the whelps once more, brushing her appendage defensively over them. Snowy cried feebly. The yellow cubs squeezed closer. Minutes elapsed, then hours. The evening remained strangely motionless. At some stage, one of the junior females from the pack strayed too far and spooked Zana's group. The scavengers dispersed rapidly, but not without intent. They had verified what Zana already guessed. The felines possessed newborns, and newborns signified chance. When daybreak commenced, to elevate the obscurity, Mara finally permitted herself to shut her vision. But the second she did, the two amber infants moved and pushed their route toward her midriff to feed. Snowy attempted too, but his motions were lethargic. Mara tenderly steered him, but he slipped away too powerless to grip. Her spirit clenched. She poked him again, and again he slid. She scarcely perceived Ka nearing until the elder female was already positioning beside her. Ka observed the young, then dipped her crown toward Snowy. She inhaled once, cautiously, nearly medically, and for a second Mara witnessed something she had not viewed prior, a glimmer of compassion. But compassion was insufficient to rescue a whelp. Ka raised her skull and gazed out toward the grasslands. Her hearing rotated toward the dim traces of scavenger prints. She comprehended perhaps better than Mara what that signified. A cub's frailty, killers observing, a troop already pulled tight by starvation. When Ka looked back at Mara, her look narrated a tale without uttering a term. A tale regarding peril drawing near. A tale regarding the expense of guarding the incorrect infant. A tale regarding choices no matron should ever be compelled to enact. When the daylight ascended, completely heating the terrain, Mara sensed a change in the realm. The odor of scavengers remained. The strain within the troop was escalating. The pale cub was becoming frailer. And elsewhere within the gloom, Zana was readying for a fresh evening. When the star sat loftily above the Serengeti, the tranquil cadence of the pack had commenced to undo. That which began as silent disquiet in the period following the white cub's arrival now became keener, weightier, resembling a constricting cord nobody ventured to sever. Each feline in Ka's family perceived it. Even the breeze appeared to flow distinctly, conveying anxiety from one patch of reeds to another. Mara felt the alteration most of all. She had scarcely slumbered since delivery, her nerves pulled tight by the recollection of hyena cackles floating through the dark. The snowy infant rested coiled beside her, respiring thinly. His bleached coat shone beneath the hot radiance, lovely yet agonizingly obvious. The amber offspring merged into the parched reeds as the wild designed. The white one conversely gleamed like a lost celestial body. Ka drew near once more that forenoon, her stance laden with worry. She had viewed Mara from afar, noting how the young fed, how the mother shielded them, how the pale one battled with even the slightest motion. The matriarch was not cruel, yet she governed with endurance in mind. Command demanded options, and options were seldom just. The elder female sat near Mara, her appendage sweeping the grit. She gazed at the white cub for a lengthy span, not with the chilly scorn of Jarrow, but with the burden of one witnessing a trouble expand right before her pads. Mara nudged her son defensively, yet even she could not disregard the reality. His gasps were meager, his legs shook. When the golden kin nursed, the pale one could hardly sustain himself upright. A remote blare resonated over the flatlands, pachyderms traveling toward a drinking spot. To the pack, it signified little. To Ranger Walker, who detected it from his surveillance crest, it signified the earth was altering. All things depended on motion here, beasts' climate, even the delicate equilibrium betwixt hunters. He observed through his optics recording habits and trails. He had passed years analyzing how biomes reacted to pressure, akin to how he once evaluated assurance demands, following natural catastrophes. A solitary, frail connection transformed all things, and the white cub was turning into that fragile connection. As the day became more scorching, Mara risked a few paces away from the burrow for the initial time since birthing. She required moisture. Her frame shivered from dryness and weariness. The amber whelps held to her pelt, crying tenderly. The white one attempted to pursue, yet crumbled in the herbage after merely a few paces. Mara halted. Her intuition shrieked at her to revert to him, to urge him onward, to bear him if she must. But the remainder of the troop was observing. Jarrow raised his crown initially, his yellow optics tightening when he viewed the pale one lying solitary. He rose to his feet, sinews rolling beneath his junior skeleton. Mara walked back toward her bleached infant, obstructing the male's sight, but it did little to cease the stress mounting. Kaa's snarl halted the male before he approached, too near. Yet the friction persisted. Mara looked at her ruler mutely, begging for duration. Duration for the cub to wax mightier. Duration for the pack to comprehend that variance did not always signify peril. But in the bush, variance frequently signified demise. Kaa could not feign otherwise. Later that afternoon, the matriarch guided the troop on a brief stalk. Mara remained behind with the young, realizing she was too feeble to participate. When the family reverted, their stomachs only partly filled vexation hung about them like heat mist. Jarrow's tolerance was eroding. Starvation honed instincts, made moods briefer, made gambles less tolerable. That dusk, the leader took the resolution to offer the infants their initial stalking tutorial, a tender presentation to motion and stealth. Mara hesitantly permitted her amber kids to trail, watching over them from afar. The pale one endeavored to join, but again stumbled, dropping before he attained the grass border. Mara hoisted him softly by the neck, yet she knew he could not maintain pace. The troop dispersed through the reeds, rehearsing squats, sampling the gale. It was intended to be safe. But then destiny interfered. The pale one, straining in Mara's wake, released a tiny, shrill shriek, a benign noise, a baby's wail. But in the incorrect instant, it might as well have been a beacon fired into the heavens. Kaa's hearing flickered primarily. The male stiffened. The pack pivoted as one. Then the scavengers replied. From past a cluster of high reeds arrived a fluctuating, ghastly cackle pursued by another and another. Zana had been biding time observing, and the cub's shriek had granted her exactly what she required: verification. Mara's spirit crashed against her chest. She jumped to stand over her kids just as a duo of hyena outlines burst through the herbage. The troop growled instantly, shaping a wall about the little ones. The matriarch charged with a bellow that vibrated the soil, sending the initial attacker scrambling rearward. The male assaulted subsequently, rushing ahead with rash rage. The clash was short but volatile. Grit swirled, fangs glinted. The scavengers withdrew, yet not before their leader paused for one freezing second on a remote rise, gazing directly at the bleached infant, shaking at Mara's pads. The white one had been spotted not merely by the family, but by their foes. After the attackers scattered, the troop reverted to the lair, but not with solace. Their stares landed on the pale one like strikes. To them, the reality had turned indisputable. His wail had almost caused them all to perish. Mara coiled her form around him, her respiration jagged. She sensed the glares, sensed the verdict, sensed her realm contracting to a solitary dot of dread. As the firmament darkened and shades elongated across the savannah, Kaa drew near Mara with a weight that sent shivers down her backbone. She sat before the spent mother, her vision mournful yet resolute. Something had altered in the pack, and Mara realized without a single term uttered that the choice she dreaded most was pulling nearer, nearer than the gloom, nearer than the scavengers, nearer than she was prepared to confront. The cub's distinctness was no more merely a hazard. It was turning into a hex the troop could no longer bear. The Daystar slid below the Serengeti skyline, like a token submerging into the deep, abandoning a firmament streaked with diminishing amber. Obscurity assembled rapidly thereafter, extending lengthy shades across the flatlands. Evenings here were never tender. Every beast felt the alteration, the manner the terrain exhaled peril once the radiance vanished. Yet this night felt distinct, weightier, as if the atmosphere itself realized that something irrevocable was about to occur. Mara positioned herself at the mouth of the burrow, her frame rigid, as she surveyed the exposed turf. The troop had reverted from their stalking tutorial, vexed and disturbed following the scavengers' invasion. Ka marched near the core of their domain, fidgety, in a fashion Mara had never witnessed. And Jarrow. The male stalked to and fro like a tempest, biding time for a bolt to hit. His appendage snapped keenly in his wake, and his yellow optics never appeared to depart the lair where the white cub rested. The pale infant was coiled near Mara's feet, quivering from fatigue. He had scarcely recuperated from the prior fright. The amber whelps, already sturdier, slumbered peacefully beside him. But the white 1 minute, bleached and delicate, appeared, as if the globe itself compressed his little chest. Mara dipped her crown and poked him tenderly. He parted his lids only partially. Even that minor exertion shuddered through his entire form. She groomed his pelt, attempting to offer him heat he could not retain on his own. Her spirit pulled agonizingly at the view. To her, he was not a load. He was her son. Yet in the bush, devotion alone did not shield a whelp. Endurance required more than fondness. A sudden crack of branches sent Mara's hearing straight upward. She jerked her skull towards the source of the noise. From the gloom, dim giggling resonated. Hyena cackles deep and elongated. It undulated across the savanna like a caution. The tribe was back. Jarrow froze mid-step. Ka raised her head abruptly and released a deep rumble that vibrated through the family. Every female pivoted toward the noise sinews constricting. The dark had always pertained to hunters, but lately it pertained more to the scavenger clan than to anyone else. Zana had grown braver, more ravenous, less fearful of traversing borders. And the white cub, his bleached coat was a beacon in a realm of shades. Mara squeezed her form tighter about her kids. The scavengers were too distant to view clearly, yet she could feel them, numerous of them, traveling just out of sight, observing, abiding. They had sampled the chance earlier when the cub's wail revealed the pack's location. They would not squander such an opening again. Ka stepped nearer to Mara, her visage serious. She did not snarl or roar. She did not require to. Her existence bore the burden of command. She gazed at Mara, then at the infant, then back toward the obscurity where menace skulked. No terms passed betwixt them. Felines did not need them. Intuition conversed clearly enough. Mara's stomach knotted. She realized what the matriarch was pondering, realized what the troop was pondering, and worst of all, she realized they were not incorrect. The white one was a hazard they could no longer overlook. As the night deepened, the family held formation, shaping a guarding ring. Jarrow took the four keen for a clash. Ka remained near Mara, her vision sweeping for motion. More scavenger laughs floated nearer, the disturbing chorus growing louder. The group was assembling. Zana's outline emerged briefly on a remote crest, just long enough for Ka to comprehend the reality. This was not a random meeting. It was a pursuit. A shiver expanded through Mara's bosom. The white cub cried feebly, feeling her stress. She nudged him again, her respiration shaking, His petite frame hardly reacted. A surge of powerlessness swept through her. She had battled for her young before, but this time the menace was not regarding might or talent. It was regarding the plain, cruel rationale of nature. Suddenly Jarro broke. He charged toward Mara with a snarl trapped betwixt terror and rage. Ka intercepted him with a heavy bellow, striking a paw into the soil. Grit swirled, and the troop froze. Jarro's growl died rapidly, but his wrath did not. He glared at the white infant with mute blame. He is the cause they are arriving. The golden cub moved perplexed by the friction. The pale one burrowed himself deeper into Mara's pelt, as if attempting to vanish. Mara draped her tail around him defensively. Her frame quivered with the impact of what she already realized was arriving. Ka ultimately drew near. She dipped her crown until her brow met Mara's. It was a motion only performed in scarce instants of oneness, instants of sorrow, instants of impossible reality. Mara's breath caught. The matriarch was not irate. She was not brutal. She was resigned. The pack could not endure another evening like this. Mara felt her soul fracture before Ka even stepped back. Her drives shrieked at her to combat, to guard her kid, to scratch at the earth if she must. But behind her, the infant released a frail, delicate sigh. And in that noise, scarcely more than a murmur, she comprehended what no matron should ever have to accept. Guarding him meant forfeiting everyone else, and forfeiting everyone else meant forfeiting him too. The scavenger laughter grew louder nearer. The troop shifted anxiously. Jarro rumbled under his breath. Mara rose on quivering limbs. She tenderly hoisted the white one by the neck. Her amber kids cried in confusion as she walked away from them, away from the family, away from security. No soul halted her. No soul required to. The verdict had been rendered. Ka viewed her departure with grief etched into every crease of her face. Jarro finally looked aside, as if the view of mercy annoyed him more than the threat skulking in the gloom. Mara trudged through the high reeds, each pace weightier than the prior. The night draft chilled her marrow. The hyena giggles faded behind her, too remote to assault, yet near enough to remind her why she was enacting this. The cub whimpered in her jaws. A tiny shaking sound, a petition she could not answer. She continued walking. When she attained a solitary, withered timber on a small crest, she finally ceased. The terrain stretched open around her silent void, unguarded. The moon illuminated the pale infant in her mouth, making him shine like a delicate shard of light. With shaking motions, Mara lowered him to the soil. The white cub batted his eyes, slowly looking up at her. His miniature form rose and fell jaggedly. He did not comprehend. He could not. Mara pushed him gently, then again. Her breath shuddered. Her spirit screamed, yet her paws remained motionless. A mother's devotion had carried them this far. But devotion could not rescue him now. With the burden of the globe compressing her bosom, Mara pivoted and commenced to walk back toward the troop, each stride breaking her more than the last. Behind her, the white one released a soft, diminished wail that melted into the dark. She did not turn back. She could not. And somewhere far behind the rise, the scavengers heard the cry and started to move. The Serengeti daybreak arrived gently, its faint glow reaching over the savannah like shaking hands. Yet for Mara, the ascending star seemed frostier than the deepest gloom. She trudged sluggishly towards the troop, her strides shaky, her respiration shallow. The white cub's aroma still stuck to her snout, specter-like, declining to vanish. The amber offspring sprinted to her flank the instant she came back, rubbing against her with guiltless delight. However, Mara hardly reacted. Her spirit was someplace distant to her rear, resting under that withered timber where she had abandoned her frailest kid solitary. Ka drew near initially, her look a blend of solace and sorrow. She understood the burden of Mara's decision. Each female realized endurance in the bush required offerings no matron ought ever provide. And yet Mara had performed what the family required, what the terrain itself had compelled upon her. Ka pressed her crown softly against Mara's, a scarce motion of comfort, yet even her contact could not ease the pain inside the mourning mother. A few paces distant, Gerald observed with tightened vision. He was not brutal, merely junior. Junior enough to credit that might was the sole thing that counted. Junior enough to view the White One as a peril rather than a living being. He marched restlessly, appendage snapping, looking toward the skyline with the gaze of someone abiding for a menace that never quite departs. Mara settled into the shelter with her golden kids, but she could not relax. Each time she blinked, she beheld Snowy's minute visage, his bleached optics seeking her, his tender wail sinking into the dark. She groomed her remaining infants half-heartedly, their heat doing little to calm the vacancy compressing on her bosom. Distant in the background, Ethan Walker hiked his surveillance beat with a weighty feeling of necessity. The date felt incorrect. The atmosphere felt incorrect. He had labored in nature defense long enough to rely on intuition the same way he once relied on his verdict in managing assurance demands or crisis field accounts. Every specific counted. Every small signal gestured to a larger reality. And today the signals depicted a portrait of peril. He halted beside a crest and surveyed the reeds. New prints marked the soil. Feline marks, smaller impressions alongside larger ones. A matron and newborns. However, then he detected something peculiar. The trail divided. One route directed back toward known feline domain. The other strayed into exposed terrain solitary. No adult pad prints accompanied them. Ethan scowled. A whelp, tiny and unguarded, had traveled via this zone sometime during the dark. Yet why solo cubs did not wander? Not unless something compelled them to. A shiver ran through him. He pursued the marks, meticulously treading with rehearsed quietude. The draft turned, conveying with it a dim, nearly invisible noise. Not the bellow of lions or the giggle of scavengers. Something tinier, something delicate, a feeble cry. Returning to the family strain stayed dense surrounding Mara. The females rested dispersed, watchful despite the premature time. The scavengers had pressed too near last evening, far nearer than they ought to have. The troop sensed a tempest gathering, one constructed not of precipitation, but of pelt and fangs and starvation. They had weathered the night, but daybreak did not delete peril. If anything, the daylight exposed how defenseless they genuinely were. Mara raised her crown suddenly. Her hearing flickered. An intuitive pull tugged at her bosom, a compulsion to sprint, to revert, to seek. She stood midway, yet Ka moved softly before her, obstructing her trail. The bulletin was plain. It is finished. Do not return. But nature did not care about resignation. Sorrow did not observe regulations. Mara's heart beat like a snared avian. Leagues distant, Ethan topped a little mound and halted. Beneath a bare timber, coiled into the grit like a misplaced fragment of moonlight, lay the pale figure of a minute lion infant. His legs scarcely stirred. His gasps were meager strands unraveling at the borders. His white coat shone softly in the increasing shine, a gut-wrenching disparity to the severity of the earth around him. Snowy raised his skull feebly. His optics, though hazy with fatigue, shifted toward Ethan, not in dread, not in perplexity, but in begging. Ethan stood, static, hit by the gravity of the instant. Every statute he had ever observed, every wildlife protocol, every conservation law he had vowed to maintain, none of them readied him for this. Wardens were instructed not to meddle in organic selection. Even a life assurance figure of speech could not suit here. Nature did not warranty anything. But Ethan was not viewing nature's plan. He was viewing desertion, at a being left behind through necessity, not disregard. A tender crunching arrived from the left. Ethan tensed. A scavenger walked out from the reeds. Gaunt, ravenous eyes fixed on Snowy. It was not Zana, but one of her spies. It crept ahead, head low, pulled by the odor of frailty. Snowy did not stir, did not flee, did not even wail. He merely gazed at Ethan as though abiding for the earth to select if he would exist or perish. Ethan's pulse pounded violently. He extended his hand leisurely for his signal pistol, not to slay, but to protect. Yet even presently, even in this existence or demise instant, he faltered. Wardens were not intended to interfere. They were designed to watch, record, and maintain the equilibrium. But what equilibrium? What righteousness existed in abandoning a perishing whelp to be shredded apart? The scavenger crept nearer pace by calculated pace. Ethan solidified his grasp on the flare launcher. Snowy batted his lids sluggishly, a minute capitulation in his spent vision. Returning to the pack, Mara raised her crown once more. Something within her adjusted. A drive as ancient as the soil itself. A segment of her had observed the statutes of the bush. But a matron's spirit was not governed by endurance alone. The pain inside her bosom expanded until it occupied her entire essence. She released a tender, fractured wail. Ka observed her meticulously, comprehending what was transpiring. She brushed her brow softly to Mara's again, but this time the motion bore a distinct significance. Not restriction, not caution, but grieving. And far distant beneath the solitary timber, Ethan ultimately took a resolve that would alter all things. He marched betwixt Snowy and the advancing scavenger. What occurred subsequently would stun everyone, feline, hyena, and warden alike. The solitary hyena trod nearer its pads, dipping softly into the grit under the withered wood. Its bones displayed through its ragged coat, and starvation honed every motion. Snowy rested static at the foot of the tree, too feeble to hoist his skull now. His gasps came thin and jagged, each one resembling a minute petition for pity. The pale infant blinked once, lethargic, weighty, and for a second Ethan Walker perceived not a lion, not a wild hunter, but a youth deserted by both nature and destiny. The scavenger crept ahead. Ethan hoisted the flare pistol, his respiration stable but his cardiac rhythm racing. He had discharged beacons prior, during salvages, during crises, even once to disperse a territorial bull elephant. But this instant felt distinct. Here he was not shielding travelers or reacting to a logged menace. He was standing betwixt existence and demise for a being that nature had already sentenced. Snowy emitted a dim noise, scarcely a murmur. The hyena's hearing flickered. It paused, reevaluating the hazard of nearing a mature mortal. Ethan stepped ahead, adjusting the burden in his boots, rooting himself solidly betwixt hunter and quarry. The hyena exposed its fangs, yet did not withdraw. Starvation made beasts brave, and in this pitiless, arid period, despair pushed even wary foragers into rash options. Ethan realized the regulations. Wardens were schooled to let nature enact its path. Meddling produced instability, but gazing at Snowy, frail and vanishing, he could not shed the sensation that this was not an organic sequence of events. Snowy was not perishing because he was powerless. He was perishing because he was distinct, because the sphere refused to construct space for him. A recollection emerged from years ago, long before the Serengeti, when Ethan labored in catastrophe response. He had once managed a life assurance demand after a kin lost a child in a dwelling blaze. He recalled the manner the mother had held to the tiniest possessions, as if rescuing them might revise the history. Agony like that did not observe regulations. It merely resided inside people forever. The hyena inched nearer again. Ethan elevated the flare launcher higher. "Do not compel me to enact this," he murmured. Not that the beast could comprehend, but because he required to hear his own vocals in the mounting strain. The hyena struck. Ethan discharged. The beacon erupted through the ether with a violent snap, bursting in a luminous strip that fizzed as it sailed across the firmament. The scavenger slid laterally, shocked by the explosion of warmth and radiance. It snarled once, withdrawing several paces, then finally pivoted and vanished into the high reeds with a vexed huff. Quiet descended rapidly, except for the dying fizz of the flare. Ethan breathed tremulously. The instant the peril elapsed, his knees felt oddly frail. He had traversed a boundary one wardens were not supposed to traverse. He realized this resolve could result in censure, documentation, maybe even removal. But gazing down at Snowy, barely holding to existence, he also realized he would enact the same resolve again. He lowered himself sluggishly to the soil beside the minute whelp. Snowy did not stir. His pelt shimmered dimly in the morning shine, yet the heat of the star appeared unable to attain him. Ethan extended a palm, tentatively doubtful if the cub would react with dread or intuition. But Snowy only respired soft, shaking gasps. The second Ethan's digits grazed the cub's flank, Snowy released a noise so tiny it was nearly a sigh, a delicate exhale of capitulation. The warden froze. That solitary contact contained something deep, a delicate link betwixt two beings who ought to have been aliens. Ethan carefully slid his palms beneath the infant-sensing bones, too keen under thin skin. Snowy weighed nearly 0. The cub's crown rolled to the edge, leaning feebly against Ethan's cuff. Ethan felt a taut pain in his bosom. "You are merely an infant," he mumbled under his breath, his tone fractured with sentiment. "You did not select any of this." He looked about to ensure the hyena had not reverted. The terrain was silent, weirdly silent, as if the grasslands themselves held their breath. Leagues away, Mara moved violently from where she rested with the pack. Her frame jerked with drive, a drive she could not comprehend. Something in her spirit tugged keenly, a phantom strand connected to the infant she had left in her wake. She rose partially, earning a keen stare from Jarrow. Ka observed too, her vision filled with a tangled blend of compassion and the harsh reality of command. Mara moaned softly, a noise too hushed to travel far, but full enough to vibrate in her marrow. Ethan drew Snowy to his torso, cautiously, nursing him the way he had once held hurt dogs during relief missions. The cub's tiny cage expanded feebly beneath his hand. It was a marvel he had endured the night at all. A crunching noise captured Ethan's focus. He tensed. Another hyena appeared. This one was grander, mightier, undeniably known. The dark splotch on the shoulder, the penetrating stare, the steady, assured gait. Zana. She stepped ahead with computed peace, her eyes fixed onto Snowy. She was not rash like the scout. She was not famished. She was stalking. She acknowledged quarry when she viewed it, but she also acknowledged peril. And presently, the human standing betwixt her and her target was the greatest peril on the plains. Ethan stepped rearward, holding Snowy tight. "Not this occasion," he whispered. Zana rumbled a deep, sonorous tremor that undulated through the grit. She took a pace ahead. Ethan hoisted the flare pistol once more, although it was void. His heartbeat thundered in his hearing. He realized he could not discharge a second round. He could only feign. Zana inhaled the breeze, assessing the scenario. The human scented resolved. Hazardous. She huffed, lips curled in vexation, then pivoted sharply and melted back into the tall herbage. But her withdrawal did not feel like dread. It felt like a vow. Ethan remained rigid for several seconds before he ventured to move again. His breath shook. Then he gazed down at the frail existence in his limbs. Snowy blinked once, weak but conscious. A connection shaped in that split second, voiceless, indisputable. This was the initial time Snowy had ever been handled with tenderness, and the initial time Ethan had ever felt the burden of a life so tiny yet so significant. The moment no soul desired to witness had elapsed, but the choices that followed, they would transform all things. The morning orb ascended leisurely above the Serengeti, throwing lengthy amber beams across the flatlands. It heated the grit, the silent timbers, the remote crests. Yet somehow it failed to touch the tiny patch of soil beneath the withered wood, where Ethan Walker halted nursing a perishing whelp. Snowy rested flaccid in his embrace, his gasps slender each one, a brittle fiber menacing to sever. Ethan clutched him, near sensing the dim shudder of existence against his torso. For a lengthy span, Ethan did not stir. He merely paused there, hearkening to the silence. The world felt weirdly motionless, as if nature herself waited to observe what he would enact next. The scavenger tribe had withdrawn for the present, yet he realized they would revert. Zana was not finished. Starvation and intuition would pull her back like a current, and Snowy would not endure another hour on the exposed savanna. Ethan swallowed with difficulty, the burden of his option pressing into him like a rock. Wardens were not intended to meddle. They were not supposed to pick sides. They were designed to shield the equilibrium, not the singular entity. He had inked papers, finished drilling, even debated conservation protocols, similar to health assurance contracts, systems constructed on justice, structure, and regulation. But the globe was not just, and the statutes did not calculate for instance like this. Snowy shifted faintly. A minute motion so soft Ethan nearly missed it. The cub's snout brushed against his coat. Ethan exhaled shakily. "I realize," he whispered, voice dense. "I realize, little one, hold on." He adjusted his grasp and commenced walking. Leagues distant, Mara rested with the family, her amber offspring coiled against her midriff. But she could not repose. Something ate at her spirit, a drive she could not disregard. She raised her crown eyes, fixed on the skyline, as though she could view through the high reeds past the ridges all the way to where Snowy lay. Her breath quivered. Ka noted her look softening in quiet comprehension. Mara rose partially, yet Ka stepped before her, not with might, but with a gaze that stated, "He is departed. You must shield the ones who endure." Mara dipped her head, but her vision stayed locked on the distance. Ethan marched more rapidly now, each stride a rebellion against the rules he had lived by for decades. The warden base was not near, but it was nearer than demise. If he could attain it before Snowy's vigor vanished completely, the small infirmary there might grant the cub a battling opportunity. The healer on duty had tended to hurt cheetah's wounded hounds, even the occasional motherless leopard. Ethan held to that expectation like a lifeline. In his wake, the reeds whispered. Ethan stiffened. Zana appeared again, her outline keen against the ascending sun. This time she was not solitary. Two more scavengers flanked her, their eyes locked onto Snowy with chilly ravenousness. Ethan's pulse pounded. He possessed only one beacon remaining, and discharging it would leave him completely unguarded. But he did not falter. He aimed into the firmament and squeezed the mechanism. The flare sailed like a scorching celestial body bursting into a spray of crimson radiance. The hyenas recoiled, shocked, growling as the fiery glow rained down. Zana snarled cruelly, stalking to and fro at the border of the light's reach. Ethan stepped rearward, slowly clutching Snowy to his chest. He could not sprint. Sprinting would invite assault. He had to maintain his position. Finally, with a vexed bark, Zana turned and vanished into the grass once more. The others pursued, yet Ethan realized it was not finished. It was only a break, one that would not endure long. He tightened his grasp on Snowy and proceeded toward the outpost, his boots crushing through the parched earth. Minutes elapsed. Long, agonizing minutes. Snowy scarcely stirred. Now his respiration was so faint, Ethan had to halt and verify if he was still breathing. When the cub's cage finally rose again, Ethan pressed him closer, whispering soft reassurances, as if terms alone could keep him tethered to the realm. Finally, the warden base came into sight. A small collection of structures circled by fencing and briar barriers. Relief swept over Ethan so powerfully he nearly tripped. He quickened his gait, crossing the final span of herbage. "Angela!" he shouted, tone cracking as he neared the clinic. "I require aid." The healer, a mature woman with stable palms and a peaceful manner, stepped outdoors instantly. Her eyes expanded when she viewed what he bore. "Ethan, is that a lion whelp?" He did not reply. He simply surrendered Snowy to her, with a gaze that spoke volumes. Angela rushed inside with the infant, and Ethan pursued, heart-thumping. Snowy rested on a cushioned slab as she assessed him. "He is critically dried out," she mumbled, "and malnourished. His body warmth is hazardously low." She readied liquids and tenderly slid a minute needle under the hide. Snowy did not react. He was too weak even to flinch. Ethan stood at the border of the chamber, hands trembling. "Can he endure?" Angela did not reply promptly. She draped a heated cover around the cub and stepped back with a sigh. "I possess no knowledge, but we are granting him the finest opportunity he has ever possessed." Ethan bowed his head, swallowing past the lump in his throat. He had traversed every boundary, today shattered rules he had followed for years. Not for glory, not for pride, but because something within him declined to forsake a being who had already been forsaken by everyone else. As Snowy lay motionless beneath the warm cover, Ethan reached out and rested a hand gently on the cub's back. Snowy did not move, but after several dragging seconds, Ethan sensed a dim shudder under his palm. A gasp, soft yet actual, a struggle to exist. Angela looked at Ethan and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever occurs," she stated softly, "you performed something remarkable today." Ethan did not feel remarkable. He felt humbled by the small life in front of him, by the brutal fairness of the wild, and by the weight of the choice he had made. Outside, the Serengeti draft swept across the flatlands, conveying murmurs of both peril and promise. The scavengers would revert. The troop would proceed. Existence would continue as it always did. But somewhere beneath a quiet roof in a small ranger outpost, a tiny lion cub with white fur was being granted a chance no one anticipated. A chance to exist. A chance to matter. A chance to demonstrate that being distinct did not mean being doomed. And as Ethan stood guard beside the table watching Snowy battle for each breath, he realized one thing with absolute certainty. What occurred next truly stunned everyone. "Before you depart, I would desire to learn what you experienced. If this tale touched your spirit even just a little, leave a plain 1 in the remarks. If it left you speechless or pondering the beauty and cruelty of nature, just type 0. Your comment, no matter how tiny, assists these narratives to travel farther. And if you would like to join me for the subsequent journey into the bush, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. There are many more powerful, emotional animal tales waiting for you. Stories that remind us that compassion can alter everything. I will see you in the next one.